Welcome to the Holocaust podcast. This is class number 40. This is class number 9 in the discourse Nachamu Ami, which is the 12th discourse in the overall book. B'shar Shehekdimu 5672. And we are holding over here. Now, this is going to be the second class in chapter 46. Okay. So we have been a little bit out. I traveled a little bit, and it's always hard to get myself settled and focused back in. But here we are, and hopefully let's keep the course over here. Stay the course. So he's holding right now in the discourse in the transitioning from the Orpnimi, from the internal lights, to the Armakiv, to the encompassing lights, which is the whole where the book began, as we discussed in earlier classes. However, in his last bit of the subject regarding the internal light, which is, in other words, even though we're already in chapter 46 in this Maamor, he already turned our attention that whatever we discussed till now is only the Orpnimi, which is lights that settles in vessels, and the root of the light is in the secondary element of the Or Ein Sof, the Esespheres Agnuzas, the hidden Esespheres, which from the very, very beginning, as he described it, is a light that has already a relationship to revelation, to somebody, to the worlds, even and before the Tzimtzum, as we discussed earlier. And like he gave a very beautiful thing. He said, like, it's the tzitzis, part of the talis, where even though it's of the same material of the talis, of the greater garment, it is still a sub. It's still not the talis itself. So it's like how the or pnimi is embedded in the or makif. It's still included in the infinite light, but he says, but now we're going to start talking about the encompassing light. But before he goes there, he says, because you should know, he says, this is where we left off last time, that all the 10 Sefirot, the whole concept of Sefirot is only for the sake of the world. There's nothing about the 10 Sefirot that, so to speak, God needs for himself, that adds something to his persona, to his perfection, to whatever he is for himself. The whole element of 10 Sefirot is for the worlds. And he's going to now enumerate in the rest of the discourse, discourse number 12, how every single one of the 10 spheros is unnecessary in a sense for God, for Hashem himself. It's only for the sake of the worlds. And remember last week we brought last class, in class number 8, we brought a statement of the Zohar where he says before the worlds were created, he's called wise with all types of wisdoms. It even though it exists, so to speak, before he creates the worlds, but it's because of a future creation. In other words, it has no context and no content for God himself. So what he's going to do now, he's going to work his way from the bottom up, from the simpler to the more complex. That means the last Sefirot, Sfiras HaMalchus, for instance, the attribute of kingship, we can appreciate very, very clearly, and it doesn't need much explanation of why it's only pertains to a creation, because kingship means to be, as we're going to see today, kingship has no definition when someone is for themselves. Then he's going to say, but emotions, even though emotions could hypothetically be a rich experience for the person himself, not necessarily necessary in essence to fully interact with someone else, but he's going to explain how obviously an emotion is a feeling that's within you, a rich experience, a deep experience. It could be an exhilarating experience, but it's always about something. It's about a relationship. Emotions are all about relationship. Now he's going to take it even a step higher and say, well, the intellect is kind of a playground, so to speak, for a person with himself and in himself. It's a place where a person can entertain themselves in intelligence and not having to go out of themselves completely. It's your private domain. Unless you're a teacher, where your intelligence is very much related to other people, but other than that, intellect has a great space within the human experience completely in the inwardness of the human. So we can say the same thing by God. God has an intelligence unrelated to creation. So he's going to explain, no, how even intelligence has and only really has significance, at least regarding Hashem, in as much as it's going to play a role in the bringing forth of the creation of the world. Other than that is utterly meaningless. That's where the rest of the discourse is going. So let's start over here. He's going to begin working his way from the lowest to the highest, begin with Malchus. Again, this is the middle of chapter 46, I would say, about a third way through the Perek. All the 10 spheres are for the sake of the world. Like the element of kingship. The concept of kingship, shayach, is only possible when there is a people, dafka. Kamaimer, as it says, Ein melech b'lo am. There is no king without a people. There always has to be a am. There has to be a nation. You can't speak of a king without a nation. A king is someone who is elevated and has, so to speak, jurisdiction, and the others who are not himself subjugate themselves to their king and serve him. And he directs them and guides them and takes them to great success. But there is a him and them. You can't speak of kingship without. Now, the essence of those words, Ein melech b'lo am, I think its original statement is in Rabbeinu Bachaya. I think it's not a statement of the sages, but it's in Rabbeinu Bachaya. And and that's the reason why we say, when we speak about God creating the worlds, we very strongly put kingship as the nucleus of that entire thing. Because we say that when God desired to be a king, it called for a kingdom. It inherently, it's not this entire desire, fulfillment of God's desire to be a king is impossible without a creation. Now you can ask the question, well, if God desired, let's say, to be kind, that also inherently calls for a kingdom, for someone other than himself to be kind to. So we'll still talk about that. Why is an emotion of kindness, why don't we say that is the impetus and that's the nucleus of creation? We say kingship. If God decided that he wants to be kind, he needs to have somewhere to land his kindness. So we need some deeper thinking of how kingship is more interwoven with the recipient, someone who's other than self, with the other than other emotions. But let's see. We'll leave that for later. But and the cause of the desire to the creation of the world, because Hashem made the decision, it arose in his will, I want to be a king. And if he says, I want to be a king, if that's a desire, says, I want to be a king, he cannot fulfill that desire without having a other to be a king over. And who's the other? And the other has to be more than one. You can't be a king over one individual. So you have to have multiple subjects. And those subjects have to be other than yourself. In this case, God has to bring up into existence consciousness that is disconnected or not a continuum of God. Whether that's completely true or at least in the perception of those conscious beings as they're conscious of themselves as something other than God. And that is now enabling God to be a king over them. There is no king without a people. That's why the first thing is I want to be king. That was A. And A, what follows A, B comes after A. And that's why it arises in Hashem's desire that there should be worlds. And this, that it says, he questions the idea. Is a statement in our prayer when we say the master of the world, Adon Olam, the master of the world, Asher Malach, who was king, B'terem kol Yitzur Nivra, before any formation was created. So we are ascribing kingship to God before anything was ever made. So here you have the question. If inherently a king can only be when there is a creation, when there is someone other, how do we then say truthfully that God, oh, you were king before anything was created? God was not king before anything was created because there's no kingship before. You can say he was smart before everything was created and he was great or whatever, but how can you call him a king before anything was created when inherently kingship doesn't apply? The king is born when there is someone to be a king over. I knew. So he explains, and that's the fact that we say so in davening does not negate the principle that we laid out that there's no king without a people. Because when we are referring in davening, we are referring to a state of kingship that is not in any way an expression of kingship, but the root from where kingship comes from before it's actually kingship. But since it's the root for kingship, we can ascribe to it that you're king. So what does that mean? It's kingship before it has any form of revelation. It's kingship as it is rooted, or as it is embedded in the essence of Hashem Himself. That's before any revelation. But let's come back to that in a second. But in a term of an expressed revelation of kingship, the idea of kingship it has an inherent connection to the world, or else it cannot exist. There cannot be a revelation of kingship without somebody to reveal it onto. But in essence, kingship already is there, as he says in Atzmos, in the very essence of God. So what does that mean? So we are ascribing kingship to him when he's alone. So let's break this down possibly and like this. When someone is a king, what's going on over here? What's going on over here is we right away notice that there is a higher being and a lower being, which in essence means, and the higher being is not just minding his own business, but the higher being is expressing his you say it's dominance. Kingship is a certain dominance, but he's expressing his highness. He's advocating his talking about his king or her king, whatever it is, his or her exaltedness over the rest. A king and a people is that there is a leader and there's someone who controls the people, who rules over the people. So the king is inherently an exalted being over. Now, that exaltedness of the king over a nation in the form of, hold on one second. In the form of kingship, it means one, subject A is exalted over subject B. That's its form of kingship. But the inherent kingship, where is the exaltedness? Exaltedness. That someone is an elevated being, that's where the actual kingship comes from. And let's put it this way. Can every person be a king? I mean, you would say in a small little way, yes. Over every person can exert a certain level of exaltedness over, but in general, I talk about a king in the world. No, there are certain people who are blessed with traits of kingship. Call it a certain charisma, call it a certain, and what is its root? The root of it is that the person carries a certain elevated status. They're elevated within themselves. They're an elevated being. Now, it's possible that an elevated being will never become a king. But yet the person is a candidate for being a king because they are an elevated being. There are people that are lowly beings. When I say lowly, I don't mean lowly in every negative sense. They just don't have that I don't call it transcendence. They don't have that aura about them. It just doesn't exist in them. They're just regular. The king is not regular. He's a cut above. So there is the way that expresses itself in actuality, where somebody is above the rest, or there is a being who is so perfect with every kind of perfection. I'm talking about God, who is perfect with every kind of perfection. So in his perfection, so to speak, he is exalted. So that exaltedness might never translate into him displaying and revealing it, so to speak, because an expressing of exaltedness, always an expression of exaltedness, has to be expressed towards something. You can't express exaltedness if it's not going to, the very notion of exaltedness is that someone is higher than something else in expression. But in essence, an exalted being is an exalted being. So a person who in essence has the quality of being a king, but in the end never made it to the throne, has an inherent kingship. And it could be, when I say never made it to the throne, doesn't only mean that they never actually become a king. It could be that that exaltedness that in essence exists in this person can lay dormant their entire existence and never even show it to be shown, even in terms of their classmates when they're kids in school, and in terms of community or anything. It's almost like you have a spiritual shrink or someone like that who can do a scan of the person's soul and say, hey, you have a certain, you're a king in the making, or a queen in the making, and you might never know about it. So God, in essence, has a reimamos, has an exaltedness, but it has no context at all when it's within him as exalted. But that's the essence of it. So when we say God, you a king before anything was created, means that God didn't need the world to be exalted. He is exalted. Now, if he chooses to project exaltedness, that requires a creation to be projected upon so that he can exalt over others. So both notions are true. There's no king without a people. There's no actualized kingship. There's no experience of kingship. And I don't mean only actualized in the sense of projected onto people. Even the conscious experience of exaltedness, as to be conscious of your exaltedness, requires that you're exalted over. There is a relative, there is a measurement happening over here. You know that these are the people that you want to be exalted upon them, or you know that they're all worthy to be my subjects and I can be the king over them. But you have to measure it with something else once that kingship expresses itself into manifest consciousness. But before it manifests itself in consciousness, But as it is in essence, it just is. And because it is in the essence, that's why it can be there later. If it's not there in the essence, it's just not there. So you call it royal blood. It just has to be there. But for all practical purposes, a revelation, and when I say practical, we mean in all expression of kingship, inherently it needs a people. So God was king before everything's great because he is exalted being. And the proof is later he's a king when he creates the worlds because of his exaltedness. But it's still true, Ein Melech Below Am. When God says, I want to be a king, which means he, so to speak, becomes conscious, so to speak, of the fact that he's exalted. Over what? The exaltedness requires an exaltation over something. So that's the as if it's beyond all revelation, but in terms of its revealing itself, the whole concept of kingship, is only when there is worlds. Now he continues, and the same also when it comes to emotions. So now he's going deeper into the soul. That's all he says about kingship. But also when it comes to the emotions, and they're for the sake of the other. Which would mean like this, and then this exactly is the differentiating point. Emotions, you could experience the emotion even when there's no one there to be kind to. You can feel the kindness, meaning even if there's you can have a conscious experience of kindness without a recipient of the kindness. Kingship doesn't work. Even your consciousness of kingship can only be where there is someone to exalt yourself over. When it comes to the emotions, the practical element of the kindness, the practical element of the compassion requires an entity, a subject, other than yourself to be kind to. But that's true. But I can be feeling kind when I'm not in touch with any other people. And I'm still feeling an emotion of kindness or an emotion of compassion. In the sense that what? Okay, we'll see about that. Can I be compassionate? Let's let this roll out. And then what I would like to still hold on to is why we pin kingship to an other much stronger than we pin the emotions to other, although emotions are also very clearly related to other people or other entities. For the sake of others. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because over here he doesn't say it's impossible to have a gilui of the emotion without another. Let's put it this way. Perhaps, again, I might be messing up over here. Please, I didn't get a chance to really think this through before. So I'm working it right now in the class. So I would say something like this. If I'm alone on an island and there's no person in sight, I will never wake up in the morning and say, I am being exalted. Let me go search the island in caves or somewhere. I might find someone that I can exalt myself over. If people land on the island and they're primitive people and they're, running around with loincloths like now I'm going to share the island with them because these guys somehow came on the island. Oh, what do I want to do? I might feel, if I let them run the place, we're going to be living in the Stone Age. We cannot do that. I need to take control and I need to share my wisdom and my forward thinking with these people and bring them up to speed to where the rest of the world is. And how do I do that? By stepping into the role of being a king over them. When a person is alone on an island and there's no one else there, And I mean, I'm not talking about a person who was born on the island alone, but a person who ended on an island and they've been away from society for quite a while. Will they ever wake up in the morning feeling kind and with a strong need to do kindness and go search, where can I land my kindness? Yes, they can. Because the awakening of the emotion of kindness could be when there is no immediate recipient. Although a person who never lived in relationship with anybody else, was born alone and never, will probably have very undeveloped emotions, very non experienced. There won't be much kindness and won't be much compassion in their existence because they had no one to express these emotions to. So of course, the emotions also require very much an interactive with someone other than yourself, but not to the degree of kingship. Kingship, you cannot begin to feel the juice of kingship, a conscious experience of kingship, unless there's someone actually there waiting for you to be a king over them. An emotion of kindness and compassion could be there, like this classical example Hasidus gives. Avram Avinu was the champion of kindness. God one day had no visitors and he was going crazy that he has no visitors. He wanted to be kind, but even though he had no one to land his kindness, his desire for kindness was pushing him to look and run outside to find someone to be kind to, which kingship would not happen. If Avram was a king and there's no one to be a king on, he wouldn't feel kingly. I need someone to be king on over. I think that's what it is. The difference between moich and lamidos, between intellect and emotions. The moich ain't tzarich lezulas. Intelligence doesn't need an other. You could, intelligence could be interactive with others, but you don't have to. You can live in a world of intelligence completely enclosed doors, withdrawn from others. Even when you don't have anybody to teach. One can brainstorm intellectual ideas for themselves. And even though over there as well, we know that there is a benefit to intellectual sharpness when you bring your ideas and discuss it with others or teach it to others. Like the sages say, from my students, I gain more than anybody else, as the sages say. A lot I learned from my teachers, even more than what I gained from my teachers intellectually, I gained from my colleagues, but most I gained from my students. That was one of the great sages who said that. Which means that intellect has a lot to gain by an interactive with someone else. So he explains, that means that it makes it richer and deeper, but not that without it, it doesn't exist. When a person is mashpia or teaches to someone else, that adds the light of intelligence to the influencer, to the teacher. Especially when he has a challenging student who asks questions and forces the teacher to think deeper into what he's saying in order to clarify to the students. Okay, hi, Gavna, as well. That's true. So intellect can also be enhanced through others. However, that's only after you have, it's a very interesting idea. It's after you have already an idea, after you have a class ready, after you have a concept that you want to teach. When you teach it, you gain clarity. That always is the case. But when you're sitting down and you want to brainstorm something new, privacy is the best. You cannot go into a classroom and then create an idea while you're in interactiveness. It doesn't work. Even when a teacher does that and it's in the class, nothing to teach it in the classroom, there's a certain silence. First of all, they can teach what they know already from the past, so that's not it. When you really need to get something new, the teacher will go silent and be and journey or withdraw into themselves, away from their student, to be able to open up the fountain of innovation of ideas and then teach. And even better, quietness, silence, a locked door, a closed room, everything is, and you're alone, no one is there. That's when you have to prepare a class. The best thing is just the quiet. Last week I gave a class last night, which is very innovative ideas. Like, to me, it was very innovative, and because I had to speak somewhere last week, and I wanted to come up with an innovative concept, and I was away. As like, last week I wasn't here. I was with my wife, and then my son came, and then she had a doctor's appointment with my son, and I was so happy because they left me in the hotel alone for like 3 hours. And for me, the alone time of 3 hours allowed the silence to like delve in and be creative. And it's just the way it is with every person who's coming up with ideas. The actual revelation. Now, as much as I understood and appreciated that very class when I first brainstormed it, when I'm actually teaching it and giving it over and interacting with people and sharing it, it's becoming so much richer and stronger. Yeah, but that's already, since the concept is already there. But the revelation of the light of intelligence in a direct manner can happen even without another. More than that, he says, and more, when one has to come to a new understanding, or a new grasp, on the contrary, anybody there other than yourself is a distraction. And also when a person needs to evaluate something, to be machriya between two svaras, one has to contemplate themselves. I want to leave this for next class. This final thing. But where is he going over here? He's creating a clear contrast between emotions and intellect. Emotions, however, don't thrive when you're alone. It's possible for a person to feel somewhat of kindness. But let's say Abraham, who woke up in the morning and needed guests and needed someone to be, let's call that a 60% urge of kindness. Had Avram Avinu woken up in the morning and found 60 people in his house waiting for serving breakfast, his kindness would be gushing at 120%. In other words, the original feeling of kindness or compassion is much stronger engaged with a landing subject than without it. It's possible without it, but on a much weaker level. And it's only because you have other times when you're kind to people that you can generate that sense of kindness even without people. But the essence of the experience is intertwined with others. Emotions. But the essence of intelligence is inward with self. Although over here as well, it's enhanced with others. Okay? So kingship is completely dependent on others. Emotions is strongly built on others, and intellect has a relationship with others as well, as we will see. But primarily, he's now at this point at least saying that intelligence is more of an inward, private thing. And then when he's later in the mind, we're going to explain that even intelligence, in essence, by God, is only in relationship to the worlds, as we're going to explain.